In September 2023, the Union government established a high-level committee on One Nation, One Election, led by the former President of India, Shri Ram Nath Kovind. The committee has engaged in widespread political discussions with national and state political parties and has also sought opinions from the public and also from the jurists.
One nation, one election.
वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन, वन नेशन। अरे हमको क्या मिलेगा वन इलेक्शन की, 10 इलेक्शन की, 12 इलेक्शन।
One nation, one election.
India's cabinet has approved a proposal for the One Nation, One Election bill.
One nation, one poll.
Now recently, the Union Cabinet has accepted the recommendations of this committee, and the members of this committee include our Honorable Home Minister of India, that is Shri Amit Shah, then our former Leader of Opposition in Rajya Sabha, Shri Ghulam Nabi Azad, our former Finance Commission Chairperson, Shri N.K. Singh, our former Lok Sabha Secretary General, Subhash C. Kashyap, our Senior Advocate, Shri Harish Salve, and former Chief Vigilance Commissioner, Shri Sanjay Kothari. Now this is an important step in making our democracy even more vibrant and even more participative. And this is what our Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, said about this One Nation, One Election and about accepting the recommendations of this high-level committee. Now, India has prided itself in its democratic processes since long. But the current system of staggered elections means that somewhere, some part of the country, at every point of time, is in election mode. So somewhere in the country, at any point of time, you see election mode is going on. For example, currently, in the month of September, legislative assembly elections are going on in the states of Haryana and the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And in this regard, One Nation, One Election plays a very, very important role. Hello, my name is Preetpal Singh, and today's topic is One Nation, One Election. See, before we go into nitty-gritties of this One Nation, One Election, what are its pros, what are its cons, how it can be implemented, what are the recommendations of the committee, we need to understand simply what is this One Nation, One Election. Now, in simple terms, it refers to holding simultaneous elections in our national parliament, that is Lok Sabha, and our state legislative assemblies of different states in our country. Now, this concept, many of you might think, is a very new idea, but it is not new. The idea of this simultaneous elections or One Nation, One Election has been around since 1983, where it was first mooted by Election Commission. But before that as well, since independence, we have had simultaneous elections multiple times in our country. Since 1967, holding simultaneous elections in our country was the norm. The first general elections to the Lok Sabha in our country and all the state legislative assemblies happened in the year 1951. And subsequently, this practice continued in 1957, in 1962, and in 1967 also. However, due to premature dissolution of some state legislative assemblies in 1968 and 1969, this cycle got disrupted. And a very important fact here is that in 1970, Lok Sabha itself got dissolved prematurely. Thus till 1970, our first, second and third Lok Sabha elections enjoyed full 5-year term. But after that, it dissolved prematurely and the norm of simultaneous election also got halted and also got disrupted. But again, the question is, why sudden buzz? See, the current government which is in power, Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, has also mooted this idea of One Nation, One Election since long. In the last 10 years of the governance, One Nation, One Election has been the talk of town, has been the part of national debates multiple times. And several Niti Aayog reports have come. Even Law Commission of India has recommended holding simultaneous elections in our country, because of which in 2023 a high-level committee was established. That is why currently there is a lot of buzz surrounding it, because recently the Union government, the Union Cabinet has accepted the recommendations of this high-level committee on One Nation, One Elections. Now what we need to know here is that what does different segments of the society think about this? And what are the different perspectives surrounding this One Nation, One Election? Now, one thing is very clear, that the central government and particularly our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji has been a strong proponent of One Nation, One Election. And he has consistently argued that frequent elections in our country are the reason for policy paralysis. And Model Code of Conduct is also one of the reasons in this. and it halts new project announcements, which leads to a lot of loss to the governance in our country. And monetarily, there is a lot of cost to be paid for this as a country. Also in 2017, Niti Aayog's report came, which presented a detailed economic rationale for this shift. And according to this report, it said that the cost of elections could be reduced in our country by 4,500 crores if elections are held simultaneously. So Niti Aayog is also a proponent of one nation, one election. Now, there are several political parties' viewpoints as well. Now, mostly the national political parties are okay with it. Of course, there is opposition to it as well, but more or less national political parties are okay with the move. But the question or the contention is from the state political parties, the regional political parties, because they argue that they would be subserved or their voice would not be heard that much if simultaneous elections are held. Now, in case of civil societies and experts' viewpoint, the viewpoints are more or less divided. Constitutional experts and civil societies, they're divided on this issue. Some argue that it is a good move, some argue it is a bad move, some argue it is against the constitution, some argue it is for the constitution, for the betterment of the country. Now, Professor Subhash Kashyap, who's a constitutional expert, has suggested that one nation, one election can be achieved, but it will require a constitutional overhaul and a broad political consensus also. And in 1999, the 170th Law Commission report, it also recommended holding simultaneous elections in our country to reduce administrative and financial burdens. And in 2018 also, the Law Commission report echoed similar concerns and echoed similar sentiments, stating that this move is legally feasible, but politically it is difficult. And politically there can be challenges in relation to this move. Now, coming to the public sentiment. Now, there was a survey conducted by Lokniti in 2019, where nearly 67% of the respondents were positive and supported the idea of simultaneous elections, that is one nation, one election. Now, the survey which I conducted personally on several social media handles as well, saw majority of the people, that is more than 50% of the people, supporting and in favor of simultaneous elections and one nation, one election. Now, one thing is very clear, that from different perspectives, there are people who support simultaneous elections. There are people who are against simultaneous elections as well. We'll be trying to understand both of these point of views and what is the way forward. But before that, we need to understand what are the recommendations given by the committee and how they think that simultaneous elections legally can be implemented in our country first, and after that administratively, of course. See, the committee has suggested 15 amendments to the constitution of our country, and the committee has suggested that it could be carried on through two constitutional amendment bills. Now, the first constitutional amendment bill, it will deal with the transition to simultaneous election system and the procedure for fresh elections to the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies before the expiration of the stipulated 5-year period of time. Now, coming to the passage of the bill can be passed by the parliament without the requirement for the ratification of the states or the ratification of the state governments or the state assemblies. And in this bill, there is talk about insertion of certain articles in our constitution and amendment of certain articles as well. First is the insertion of a new article, that is Article 82A, which deals with establishing the process by which the country will move towards a simultaneous election system for Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies. Second is amendment to Article 327 of our Constitution, where the power of the Parliament under Article 327 should be expanded to include conduct of simultaneous elections as well. Third is the amendment to Article 83 and Article 172 of our Constitution to ensure simultaneous elections when Lok Sabha and State Legislative Assembly is dissolved before the full term ends. So this is third part. Fourth recommendation is amendment of the laws of union territories for simultaneous elections. That is amendment of the UT laws, especially the Government of Union Territories Act 1963, the Government of National Capital Territory of Delhi Act of 1991, and also the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act, which was passed recently in 2019. So if all these amendments are done, this we are talking about the first constitutional amendment bill, which can be passed by the Parliament of our country, that is Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Now, there is second constitutional amendment bill also, which is recommended by this high-level committee. This constitutional amendment bill will deal with municipalities and panchayat elections, and which will fall under the entry 5 of the state list titled as local government. Now, in this, the bill needs to be ratified by at least half of the state legislatures, state legislative assemblies in the country before it can be passed by the parliament. So here, ratification of the states is required. That is, more than half of the states need to ratify this bill first before it is passed in the Parliament of India. Now, under this, there are two things prominently which are talked about. First is insertion of a new article, that is Article 324A, to empower the Parliament to make laws to ensure that municipalities and panchayat elections in our country are held simultaneously with the general elections of Lok Sabha and that is of the state legislative assemblies as well. So this is one article, insertion of Article 324A. Now there is addition of second article also, that is Article 352 Part 2, inclusion of a single electoral roll, creation of a single electoral roll for Lok Sabha, state assemblies and local bodies also. So these are the two changes proposed under the second constitutional amendment bill by the high-powered committee. And if all these things are done, legally there would be no challenge to one nation, one election in our country. Now these are the technical parts, that is the legal parts. And in ground, if it has to be implemented, the recommendations are that it can be implemented in two phases. So first is that you implement this one nation, one election in two phases. In first phase, we conduct the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assembly elections simultaneously. That happens in the first phase. In the second phase, you conduct local body elections, that is panchayat and municipalities, within 100 days of the general elections, and common electoral rules for all these elections. Of course, a detailed discussion needs to be there throughout the country, and eventually there needs to be a creation of implementation group which will implement this one nation, one election effectively and logically. Now, since we are aware that what are the committee recommendations in relation to implementation of this one nation, one election, we need to discuss in depth that what are the pros and what are the cons in relation to one nation, one election. Why are the people supporting it? Why are people opposing it? Now coming to the pros first, and what are the positives of this one nation, one election? The first very important pro, which is put forward by a lot of experts and by our Honorable Prime Minister as well, is of cost efficiency. See, conducting elections in a staggered manner in our country and leads to significant duplication of efforts and resources in our country, depletion of resources in our country. According to Niti Aayog's 2017 report, a synchronized election could result into 40% reduction in the overall cost in our country, and this fund can be utilized for other developmental purposes. This can include the savings in security, the savings in logistics, deployment of usage of public infrastructure and so on. Also, if you know, also for a matter of fact, in this 2019 Lok Sabha elections, there was deployment of over 2 million police personnel and 1.5 million paramilitary forces. So this is the first reason, that is cost efficiency. Second reason is in relation to administrative efficiency. Now, elections are a massive administrative exercise as well. The Election Commission of India deploys over 10 million polling personnel for conducting elections, for conducting national elections. With simultaneous elections, the burden on Election Commission of India would significantly reduce in relation to state and central administrative machinery also. And according to the ADR report, that is Association for Democratic Reforms report, the ECI, Election Commission of India, spends upwards of 5,500 crores on election management every 5 years. So this can also be reduced if simultaneous elections are implemented. Also, one more very important point is in relation to model code of conduct. See, whenever an election is being conducted, model code of conduct is applied. And when model code of conduct is in force, several key projects, several important decisions, several big policy making decisions cannot be taken by that state government or by the central government in case of Lok Sabha elections. Now this leads to policy paralysis and a lot of loss to the governance of our country. The Niti Aayog's 2017 report highlighted that how elections effectively paralyzed the governance for nearly 6 to 9 months in all of this 5 years. So if you see, because of this model code of conduct and multiple elections happening in our country at different point of time, 6 to 9 months of administration, 6 to 9 months of governance is lost by our country out of the 5 years, which is a very, very huge burden and liability on us. So if simultaneous elections happen, this problem can also be solved, and once elections would be happening in every 5 years. So the model code of conduct application would be less frequent, and eventually government could take more policy decisions, more new projects could be introduced, and policy paralysis can be corrected. Now another argument is given in relation to political stability. Now many people and many experts argue that simultaneous elections could give much needed political stability to a country. Now as you would know, a country's economic stability is very much correlated with political stability. If politics of a country is stable, it could generate more financial investments. And this Niti Aayog's report also suggested that if a uniform electoral schedule is there, both national and state governments can work without the constant pressure of the elections. India's policy planning in relation to economic reforms would also be great. Now, there was a research done by Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, and it showed politically stable countries who are politically very stable, they attract 20 to 30% more foreign investments because of predictable policy environments. And if the policy environments are predictable, economic reforms could also be more efficient and more foreign investors would be willing to invest in our country. And in India, the frequent elections leads to policy reversals, slowing down of economic reforms, eventually which is detrimental to our economy in some ways. So economy-wise, the simultaneous elections would help us a lot. See, one thing is very clear from all these points, that if simultaneous elections are implemented, if one nation, one election happens, cost-wise, administrative machinery-wise, policy-wise, economy-wise, in all these spheres, our country would be doing better. And our country would be performing much better than what it is performing even now. And our goal to $5 trillion economy would be more achievable and more practical. But one thing which we need to discuss as well is the challenges and cons in relation to this one nation, one election, and what could be the potential drawbacks of it. Now, more importantly, I want to focus on the argument put forward by one very prominent personality. That is PDT Acharya, who is the former Secretary General of Lok Sabha. Now, you must have read his editorials on multiple newspapers, and he publishes editorials very frequently. Now, in relation to one nation, one election, he has his own point of view. He has argued that this one nation, one election, that is curtailing the tenure of state assemblies to synchronize them with the tenure of the Lok Sabha, is against the federalism principle of our constitution, is against the federalism. He says that under Constitution of India, state assemblies are autonomous law-making bodies within the Indian Federation and are independent of the federal parliament. So a fixed tenure for the assemblies who are independent in tenure of the Lok Sabha is a key aspect of the federal setup according to him. And under Keshwananda Bharti decision, he argues that parliament does not have the power to alter the basic structure. And federalism is the basic structure of our constitutions. According to him, this altering of the tenure of the state legislative assembly and curbing it to make it meet with the Lok Sabha tenure is against the federalism. And federalism can't be done away with according to Keshwananda Bharti case, which is why he is somewhat against this one nation, one election. He also argues that the proposed amendments, which seek to do away with the fixity of tenure of the assemblies, would amount to altering the basic structure. So he says that all these changes, if implemented, could alter the basic structure of our Indian constitution, whether it be ratification of assemblies. And he says that whether the ratification of state assemblies required or not, that is not the key issue. If the amendment is carried out, some assemblies will have a term of 3 years according to him, and it may be 2 years for others as well. Also, one more thing he argues, he says that frequent elections is having a lot of positives as well. He says there are a lot of positive benefits with frequent elections. First, they enhance the accountability of elected representatives to the people. So enhanced accountability is there. Plus, frequent elections, they compel these elected representatives to go back to the people and reconnect to the grassroots. Reconnect with them frequently. Also, elections once in 5 years would mean that a representative would not feel compelled to go to the people again and again. So erosion of federalism, multiple drawbacks of one nation, one election, and positives of multiple elections in our country in the 5 years is what PDT Acharya recommends and is what PDT Acharya talks about, which are also points which we need to consider. Now, one more point which is given as a concern in relation to one nation, one election is the impact on the voting behavior. Now, according to the research conducted by the Center for Study of Developing Societies, it indicates that the voting behavior in the state elections, they differ considerably than the voting behavior which we see in the national elections, that is the Lok Sabha elections. Some people, they might vote for the national party in the Lok Sabha elections, might vote for the regional party in state assembly elections. But by combining the elections, these research argues that by combining the elections, the distinct voting preference for local and national governments might be blurred, according to this research. And it will also reduce the ability of the voters to express their preferences effectively, which can be again a drawback of one nation, one election in our country. Also, one more argument which is put forward by several experts is the practicality of synchronization. Now, one of the biggest challenge to this one nation, one election is the synchronization of election cycles. See, state legislative assemblies and Lok Sabhas, they often dissolve before completing the 5-year term. And now we have included the local bodies as well, that is municipalities and panchayats into the simultaneous elections as well. See, dissolutions often happen. Historically, we have seen that a lot of dissolutions in state legislative assembly and Lok Sabha happens prematurely. Now, what happens if the government collapses before the synchronized election cycle? Will that government or will that state have an unelected government, or will that state be without any elected government till the next cycle? That is a big question which is put forward. Also, there are several experts who argue, in addition to logistical and security challenges as well, that managing logistics for simultaneous elections would be a Herculean task for Election Commission of India. According to the Election Commission, this 2019 elections we already discussed that millions of police personnel, millions of paramilitary forces, they were deployed, and millions of EVMs were also deployed. Now, conducting national and state elections simultaneously would mean doubling these resources to an extent, not of the police personnel, but of the EVMs. It needs to be doubled, and the other resources will also double. So, ECI has estimated that additional 1 million EVMs would be required in such scenario, and procurement costs running into thousands of crores. This is one concern which is put forward by several experts. See, one more challenge or concern with one nation, one election, which several segments of the population, several jurists also argue, is that it is against the democratic nature of our country. Now, what is the argument given against one nation, one election is that if one nation, one election happens, then in that case, people are getting opportunity to vote for the governments, for the state government and for the central government once in 5 years. But if multiple elections happen after every few months, a state is having the power to show to the central government that are we satisfied with you, are we dissatisfied with you. And multiple times this has happened that in those 5 years, if after 2 years central governments take a decision, the political party which is in the central government loses majority in the upcoming state legislative elections in any part of the country. So people had an opportunity to voice their concerns multiple times after several breaks in those 5 years earlier. But if one nation, one election is introduced, the voice of the people which was earlier heard and the responsibility and the accountability of those who are elected, it might be reduced. That is one very big concern which is reflected by certain sections of our population and several experts as well. Now, since we are very clear about the challenges and about the positives of one nation, one election as well, we need to look at some global examples. Is this something which is only indigenous to India, or are other countries also applying this principle? See, there are countries like South Africa and Sweden who are conducting simultaneous elections, and their experiences can give us a lot of valuable insights. For example, in South Africa, elections to the National Assembly and the provincial legislatures are held simultaneously. Now, this system has reduced election costs in South Africa, but it has also led to concentration of power in national politics in their country, and with fewer opportunities for the regional players and the regional parties which are focusing on the local issues. That is what we can learn from South Africa. In Sweden, also elections are synchronized at all levels. However, a 2015 study by the Swedish Institute for Democracy found that the voter turnout for local elections was lower than the national elections, as the voters often focused on national issues. So national issues are often overshadowing the state issues, the local issues, if simultaneous elections happen. Again, that is one concern which is raised by experts as well, that if simultaneous elections happen, national issue might overshadow national issues like security, like terrorism, like other very important prominent issues like budget, finances and others might overshadow the local and ground issues of the states and of local assemblies and of local municipalities and panchayats. Now, in United States, there is a different model which works. See, United States follows a staggered election procedure. That is separate national elections and separate state elections. They both are held separately to ensure that the local issues, they get equal attention, but it also leads to election fatigue among the voters. So election fatigue is also one very big point which the proponents of one nation, one election give, that frequent elections after every few months in a country, it often leads to election fatigue in the country also, in the political process also, and amongst the voter as well. And according to the Pew Research Center, American elections, they costed around $14 billion in 2020, which is the highest in the US history. So costs of holding separate elections again is high in US as well as high in India as well. But despite these higher costs, US in a way has been able to maintain accountability and representation of the state-specific concerns through holding staggered elections. And the US model, it showcased the importance of balancing local and national issues. Also, do you think that is there any way out or any way between this one nation, one election and multiple elections happening in 5 years? Is there any way out? Yes, definitely there is one recommendation which is put forward, and that is an alternative to one nation, one election and an alternative to the current system as well, that multiple elections after every few months. That is the solution of bundled elections. So some experts argue that rather than holding simultaneous elections across the whole country and rather than holding staggered elections as well, what could be done is states can be grouped under different classes. That is, they can be grouped under different clusters, either on the basis of geography or on the basis of administration. They can be put under clusters, and those clusters could have simultaneous elections. So elections could be held in clusters at regular intervals. It will make it more synchronous as well, and it will reduce election fatigue and will also preserve the regional focus also. So this is one suggestion which is put forward against the one nation, one election and the current election system of our country. That is bundled elections, which is a good recommendation to consider. Now, since we have understood at great length what are the positives, what are the cons, what are the concerns, what is the way forward, it offers significant benefits to our country. It includes cost savings, political stability, administrative efficiency, but it also presents serious challenges also, which can include which particularly is concerning federalism, voter behavior, logistics, and local issues being suppressed. So India is currently at crossroads. The success of one nation, one election will not only depend on political will, but also on the ability to address these issues without compromising the principles of democracy in any way or any manner. The conversation has started, and the people and public discourse has also started. The high-level committee has given the recommendations. The Union Cabinet has also accepted the recommendations. Now it is for all of us to see that how the implementation of one nation, one election in our country works. And definitely whatever the suggestions of the public are, public should definitely be sending the suggestions to the parliament, to the government, and to different academic resources as well, so that more and more public discourse happens and it is more nuanced. And we can all achieve this one nation, one election if it happens in a better way, which is better for our democracy and better for our country as well. What are your thoughts concerning one nation, one election, and what do you think? Should one nation, one election be implemented or not? Do let me know in the comment section. I hope you gained a new perspective. All the very best and have a beautiful day.